Okay, we are live talking about another depressing episode, Turn Left.
Turn Left, aka I got depression.
Who wants to go first on this depressing hunk of television?
You had like a specific thing about this, a hot take that I was interested in seeing expanded on. Was it Daniel?
Oh, I just said I don't think the framing device is as good as the rest of the episode.
Right. Framing device. This is not a complaint. I've heard about this episode before, but apparently you and Lucy share that problem.
I think it's okay. I want to like it more, but I have trouble getting into this one too much. I mean, it's not because it's depressing. I don't know. There's something about it didn't click that much for me.
Was it Rose?
No. But yeah, that didn't help. But nah, I don't know what it is. I just feel like it didn't click that much. Like the framing device of how, she's supposed to be so important, Donna, because she told the doctor just to leave the room. Did he just stand there and drown? I think that's the framing device Daniel's talking about.
No, Daniel's talking about the planet that we opened the episode on, the bookend.
Yeah, that's a little weird. The only thing that really bothered me that I can say that's a flaw for me personally was Donna's super important because she told the doctor just to leave the room.
I don't mind it that much because the whole episode's about like little moments that turn the tide of history and the tide of your life, and the fact that Donna just telling the doctor to stop had that such a large impact.
No, it wasn't the water. If you remember, the episode makes the point that the star was blown up by the tank, and the doctor wouldn't have left without Donna telling him to stop because he was too fixated on revenge.
That makes it a little better because if you just sat there and drowned, I would have been like, oh my god.
I don't think it was revenge necessarily. I believe the Runaway Bride was right after Doomsday, so he was also like super depressed that Rose left. So I think part of him was just kind of death seeking at that moment.
Rose is gone. The whole
I don't remember if I made this point when we talked about that episode, but I feel like if anything's an issue, maybe that's it. Like, do I buy that he's like a death seeker in that episode? Like, yeah, he's sad about Rose, but for the bulk of that episode, he doesn't seem like he's in a particularly bad place.
The awkwardness of having to do a happy Christmas special coupled with a dark ending.
And like Catherine Tate being the guest star before we know she's going to come back, so you bring her back as a comedic character. If I do accept that, and if I accept that he was in a bad enough place in that episode, I have no problem. What I love about that is that this is the first of 3 times across this show we're going to do the whole a companion is literally the most important woman in the universe. I think this is the best example of it. One of my major thoughts coming out of this episode was like, man, Donna's character arc is the best possible version of Clara's character arc in Series 7, where that one is like, what makes you so important? Like, why are you so significant? And it's a plot thing. Like, she's literally important to the plot. Like, I like what we do here better because when we get to, in the next couple of episodes, Donna was the most important woman in the universe, it's not because she has, like, cosmic significance as a matter of course. It's because she was a good person. It's because she had the compassion to get the doctor to realize, like, it's time to get the heck out.
It's more rooted in her character rather than the dangling carrot plotting of, ooh, what is her deal? She is important because she is her. And it's about her impact on the Doctor.
I watched Journey's End right after because it was there. Going back to it, I think there is actually a bit of a plot point, but it's only really brought up in Journey's End, whereas the Clara thing is literally the season-long arc.
They basically introduced her as a plot point, which was what was bad about it.
Yeah, I do agree that like the Clara stuff, as her not being developed, is weak, but I do think they're trying to do 2 different things. Like, it is part of the plot. This is more of a character thing. Apples to oranges kind of thing there, though. I think the problem with Clara was she had no character was more of the problem there in that season.
It comes to my mind as a comparison to make just because the language is so similar. But you're right. Like, Donna has a character arc and Clara is a mystery box with arms and legs.
I just think it wouldn't have been as big of a plot if they actually bothered to develop Clara in Season 7B, but Season 7B, I think, was production-wise was a mess. They were trying to do too many things at once, and Moffat was busy writing the 50th. I don't think he really bothered to develop her character because he was focused on lots of other things, and it left her as kind of a bit of a blank slate.
The only person The only,
Seems to be
person who
what
seemed to be, the only person who seemed to be interested in developing her character in that season is Neil Cross. Everyone else is kind of either lumped on a mystery box or she's
Did
just
they
there.
develop her character though? Those episodes, I don't feel they actually did in a significant way.
They do a little in her second one. We should wait till series 7 to talk about this more. We should talk about Turn Left. This is derailing.
And like a general point about this episode, I don't know if this is a conscious thing. When you're given the premise of like the Doctor and Donna never meet each other and like them never meeting screws up Donna's whole life, you expect that to also reflect on her character, as in like you expect a Donna who never got to meet the Doctor to be a worse, more shallow person. And this episode doesn't do that. What I really like about this episode is that I feel like this is kind of the perfect end to the sentence of Donna's character arc before the next 2 episodes are like the punctuation mark. Donna is still companion material throughout this episode before he meets the Doctor, where like the first scene we get of like the proper alternate universe is her like at a party with her friends, and then the ship goes by and everyone's like, it's a Christmas star, and she's like, that's not a star, it's a web. But she's the only person who's actually using her brain, and everyone else is running away, and she's pulling a Bruce Wayne and Batman v Superman and running towards the danger to like see if everyone is okay. And then that ties into what I was saying about the Runaway Bride. When we were talking about it, it's like you think of Donna's character arc as being like being with the Doctor makes her a better person. I feel like that's what our collective memory of her arc is, but that's not what it is. She's already a really good person.
What I like about it is that it's not so much about how the Doctor impacts Donna in terms of her morality. It's more in her self-esteem and her sense of importance and contentment. And you really see it in her relationship with her mother, which is a really toxic relationship. And
oh god, you just reminded me of it. I forgot.
I called it in advance that like 75% of this discussion was going to be talking about Donna's mother.
The terrible mother.
Yeah, I think every episode I'm just like, oh my god, isn't Catcher Tate so great? But you really get the range of her ability in this. Like, she's funny in some moments, she's really silly in some moments. I love that bit where she's like literally yelling at Rose. It's honestly kind of uncomfortable how distraught she is, and it really brings her to that place where she does something incredibly horrific. In general, in narratives, I'm not a huge fan of framing suicide as the heroic deed. It doesn't make sense because of the way the story plays out.
She is committing suicide, but she's not.
It's not like it killed this version of Donna. She remembers everything that happened in the alternate universe.
Pointed out, she already remembers the traumatic alternate universe from a couple episodes ago, and we don't need to give her that again.
Yeah, that's referenced in this episode as well. You mentioned the whole thing about framing device. It's just mostly how the writing is really awkward, especially when Donna seems to come across as a little naive at one point just to get the episode going. That bit of line, she goes, I'm already happy, because it just feels a bit too hammered in. And this episode's not very subtle as is, but it just felt like we're trying to cram her into this moment just to get the plot going. It's written for function than it is to try to flow well narratively. Also, a lot of weird cultural stereotypes in this alien planet.
I mean, I get that, but also it could be a Firefly thing. You know, we already know that humans migrated off.
Yeah.
Humans, they're like rabbits. It made me think about the fact that we rarely, if ever, see this show like go to an Eastern or Eastern-inspired location. Like, it almost never happened.
We'll go with the classic show for that, where we're touching on some dicey territory there.
Even then, they only did it a couple times.
All the foreign stuff, even like when Donna deals with like the guy that gives him like a place to stay, foreigners are very, very stereotyped.
Yeah.
Russell T Davies episode, so yeah.
I found it super offensive personally.
It's funny because, like, yeah, it ends up becoming a kind of narrative thread in terms of the whole everything is going where they bring up the Nazi parallels. Yeah, he's a very stereotypical, friendly, jovial immigrant man who loves everyone and wants everyone to be his family. And I actually like the bit where they're all singing and Will's already singing there and then the whole family get together. That was sweet. It was a nice moment. It felt earned.
Sure, who the episode needed tonally, if nothing.
Yeah, I think what adds to the impact of that is more Bernard Cribbins' reaction to it. It's the only reason I'm looking forward to watching The End of Time is because of Bernard Cribbins. He is so good in this part, because he was only meant to have like that really bit role in the Titanic Christmas special, and the fact that they retroactively made him Donna's grandfather, it just because it makes Wilf come back over and over again.
He actually wouldn't have come back if the actor who played Donna's dad didn't die.
Yes.
The only reason Bernard Cribbins got to come back is because someone else died. That's a bit dark.
I think we're doing a track record of actors who appeared in plastic material. He was in one of the Peter Cushing movies, The Dog's Major Verse, which I have not seen. I saw the first one.
Can we consider the Peter Cushing movies canon now because of The Timeless Child?
I heard there's some EU thing where it's Ian wrote a book based on his adventures with the Doctor, and those got turned into the movies by Peter Cushing in universe. I'm not sure if that's actually like an EU thing or a fanon kind of thing. I'd have to look more into it, but yeah, I like that headcanon.
Because I don't actually have a lot to say about the framing device, except that the fortune teller lady, it took me up until this viewing to realize that she's played by Chanto.
Oh my god.
The bug lady, very...
That girl, I remember her now.
Yeah,
Well,
that
yeah.
actress has a very distinct face. And I was like, wait a minute, they got her back for this role?
It's a really, I don't know, famous or infamous, how you want to put it, moment in the episode, the internment camps moment. It's an interesting kind of level to go to. I don't know if it's doing a commentary of what was going on in the UK at the time. The idea of what's happening is remarkably prescient, considering what's going on politically at the moment.
Kind sad on the level of like, maybe without even meaning to, the show is basically telling us that without this incredibly powerful, like, idealistic figure that is the Doctor, if you take them out of the equation and leave humanity to their own devices, then they just get more and more terrible. Like a kind of funny commentary on how often we've relied on modern invasions of Earth stories across this era. The Doctor dies during the events of The Runaway Bride, which is not that long ago in terms of like time in universe or episodes. And in that stretch of time, the Earth gets screwed over 4 or 5 times in very quick succession.
The whole idea isn't really brought up that explicitly. The whole idea of panic over natural disasters happening all over the place, leading to kind of cultural changes and bigotries for the worse. It's an interesting line. I just don't think the episode really develops it beyond that one shock moment, which is a shame, but I don't think it has enough time. It's not what the episode's about. It's about Donna. That
exact same reason for me is like why that entire scene just doesn't work. Like, when I watch it, I'm just like, what are they getting them to do in the camps? Like, what is the purpose of this? In World War II, as abhorrent as it was, there was at least like a nominal purpose. They were like trying to keep these people separate from the general population. Here, it's just like, I guess we need more space or whatever.
My assumption was it was a space thing. Because, like, we know that entire continents, or at least entire countries, have been, like, blocked off. They get sent to Leeds because, like, all of the borders are closing. Big stretches of land are irradiated and uninhabitable. We just have too many people. Like, you gotta go.
What we talked about at Midnight, where Doctor Who is a very humanistic show, now it's very cynical. It's a very bleak, nihilistic view of humanity. And yeah, the idea of population control and finding a nominal excuse to cull people, for lack of a better term, that somewhat makes sense to me. I could see that happening, maybe not as bluntly the reason as it is in the episode itself, but I like the idea that it's viewed in a way that, like, if there's a mass amount of terror attacks, fear kicks in, paranoia kicks in, and certain bigotries become more prominent because of that. I think Midnight does the whole cynicism and humanity thing better, because it's a lot more personal and you get to know the characters and where their internal kind of failings occur, whereas we have to glide over what's happening to England because that's not the focus. It's about Donna. I do think it's undercooked. I get what he's trying to go with, but I feel like it's such a heavy topic. It shouldn't be window dressing to a character study.
I don't know. I feel like this episode mixes the character study and the world building really, really well. Because, like, pretty much every other scene, we're getting an update on something that's happening, like, to the wider populace because of all these events. Where you're coming from, like, specifically the internment camp thing being a relatively smaller moment. But I feel like that's just one part of the entire state of the world being really messed up. And I feel like, in general, that's captured really effectively.
I think if it wasn't for the fact that it had such a huge impact, because I see a lot of people bring it up, and most of that has to do with the acting in particularly. I think that's more why it felt a little off for me. It's effective isolated. I agree that I think the world building is good when you're seeing the impact of what's happening to Donna, and when it's doing this rather horrible mirror image of Russell T Davies's era if the Doctor died halfway through. I think that stuff's really kind of twisted, and I like that. I like the fact that he's willing to put a mirror to his own era in a rather negative way, and it's a lot of fun, and he clearly loves his own continuity. He did the reframing thing as well for Love of Monsters, but not nearly as effectively.
On the subject of the Donna stuff, I actually think it's because I just thought of this now, and I think it actually improves the internment camp thing. Where it's like, you're right, a potential issue that someone could claim to have with that moment is that it doesn't really have anything to do with Donna. Like, this other person and their family gets victimized, and Donna just has no role in that. And I think that's part of the tragedy, because everything that happens, it leans into Donna's issues as a character, is that she can do nothing to fix it. There's that moment that I really love where Wilf is like, you're not going to make the world any better by shouting at it. And Donna's like, I can try. And like, she has that impulse inside of her to try and make things better, but she just can't. Like, all the terrible things that happen directly around her, like right in front of her, people get taken out of her house, and she can't do anything.
I know, I like that. No, I get where you're coming from. It doesn't bother me that much. It's just a minor quibble. It just felt a little underbaked, personally. The only real issues I have with the episode is how rushed and weird I find the opening, and I don't mind how it ends.
But yeah, like, to the note of it being like a dark mirror for Russell's era, I haven't watched this episode in a while before last night. I forgot that, like, we make a thing about how Sarah Jane and Luke and Clyde and Ronnie all die.
And I think Torchwood dies during the Sontaran invasion as well.
These plot points I thought were really the worst parts of this episode, because I felt they just didn't make any sense. Why is Sarah Jane on the moon? Would she have been there if the Doctor wasn't there or something? That's what confuses me. If the Doctor were alive, in the normal timeline, I mean, if the Doctor were alive, are we supposed to believe that Sarah Jane would also be investigating it, stuff with the hospital, but the Doctor called her and basically said, "Nah, don't bother, because I'm going to do it"? That's all you can really say, because in this reality, Sarah Jane ends up being at the hospital. It's very strange.
I think maybe the exposition just isn't very clear, because I'm not 100% sure what happened.
I think it's just an attempt at a reference to try and set up these people being in the finale. Like, Torchwood, Sarah Jane.
I think it is definitely in part doing that. I think it's in part serving as a reminder of those characters for the audience. But I think it's also serving a clear story purpose of, like, piling on the sense of hopelessness. Because you set up all these characters to be like, okay, the Doctor's dead. We have like 2 spin-offs worth of protagonists to at least cover some things in his absence. They're gone too.
I like the fact that when he's bringing up the Torchwood things, he has to remind himself that Jack Harkness is immortal. So it's like, oh, the Sontarans kidnapped him. He goes, well, he can say, no, he's gone. He's completely gone. He can never be freed again. He's gone. He's done. Everything's hopeless.
Wouldn't he just be like,
I understand
there?
the point in trying to say that it's hopeless and everyone else has died. I think it's just executed really sloppily, especially with the Titanic. In Voyage of the Damned, if the Titanic hits the Earth, will destroy the Earth, not London. Yet in this episode, it just destroys London. It's just like a lot of really sloppy writing in this episode, which I think brings it below the level of great to me compared to what it could have been. It's a very good concept, but there's just a lot of parts of it that bug me in terms of how it's executed, which is fine, because when episodes are ambitious, they can fall flat on their faces. I just think the whole alternate universe concept is a bit dodgily executed in some ways here.
I like the idea that it's about how these things go catastrophically wrong because the Doctor's not around, and as you point out, they have to lessen the stakes of Voyage of the Damned, otherwise the episode doesn't make sense.
A lot of this episode's quote-unquote problems, I guess, between that and whatever else, it's part of what's baked into the premise of we're going to revisit the events of past episodes, because at a certain point you have to be like, maybe I overwrote the stakes of previous episodes.
You think they'd worry about that more in a time travel show?
My favorite is in the lodger when the Doctor is about to press the button and he says, if I press the button, the whole solar system explodes. That was one of them raising the stakes moments that was just like, what?
I wonder how the Harold Saxon thing went down without the Doctor.
The Master would never have discovered he was human.
Oh yeah, because the TARDIS fresh.
The one that confuses me,
Wibbly wobbly.
If the Doctor isn't around in Series 3, so are you telling me the Carry-Knights take over Earth in 1599?
I think you might be overcomplicating that one. I think it's as simple as, even if those are the events of Series 3, those are in Earth's past, so they still happened, whereas the Master stuff gets kicked off in Earth's future.
Yeah, you can tell I don't think Russell T Davies thought this script out as well as he could have.
What I'm curious about, because I just thought of this, is if the Doctor and Martha never stop at Cardiff in Utopia, then does that mean that Jack never disappears from Torchwood for 18 months?
What happens to the hand?
He never loses the hand.
He does lose the hand because it's in the Christmas invasion, I think.
An episode like this is, like Rob says, very ambitious, and I'm willing to overlook a lot of flaws just for that, because I'm the kind of person who just like ambitious stories. I still didn't care for this one that much. I don't dislike it, I just don't connect with it that much like the previous episode. episodes that we talked about.
I tend to think like it's an episode full of really, really, really great stuff mixed in with a lot of unbelievably stupid bullcrap. So, especially the story with Rose. The Rose stuff. I'm not one of these Rose dislikers, actually, but the way they used her in Series 4, where she just comes back as some parallel universe, interdimensional warrior, warning about prophecies and holding a machine gun, and while also still pining over the Doctor. It's just a mess. The whole thing. I don't even understand why she's suddenly working with UNIT. I just prefer to just ignore all those scenes. So
I think Rose, what they were trying to do, there was talks of making a spinoff, and I think this was kind of like testing the waters a little bit.
Regardless of my feelings about Rose as a character, she just feels like a plot device in this episode. She just kind of pops up and goes, "Ooh, why mysterious? What's happening?" Ooh, and then goes away for like however long they need her again.
Where does she learn all of this stuff though? Because she shows up and she's like, "Oh, I understand all this stuff about like interdimensional physics," and I'm like, "You're this random woman that the Doctor picked up and then dropped off in a parallel universe. You're just a regular person."
They established she can travel through time. She seems to know the events of the episodes when they actually happened, when this is the parallel universe.
Considering she spent the last couple of years living in a universe that isn't her own, I buy that she would spend that time trying to figure out how that worked.
It's only been, I think, a year, though.
No, the time travel thing doesn't bother me. They showed they have a time machine. That's fine. But she just seems to know what happened in the alternate universe.
Didn't she say that they have no idea if it would work when they put Donna into it, though? So, like, was she using that time machine, or did she have, like, one of those wrist ones? They never explain it.
They say that the thing with the mirrors is the time machine, so she doesn't have, like, a vortex manipulator, no.
Well, it was like you were saying, Daniel, with, like, the undercooked part with the plot. There seemed to be, like, so much that was just kind of, like, half-assed. Like, they're like, okay, what happened throughout this entire run on the show?
It felt way more about Donna's story and her importance to the Doctor and the Doctor's importance to the world, which is more of an emotional thing rather than making it 100% logical. Because if you follow the butterfly effect to a certain point, your script's just going to be eaten. You're just going to drive yourself crazy trying to work out what would happen if. So I don't mind the fact that it flies on the seat of its pants with certain plot elements, because the important thing is that this is Donna's life without the Doctor, and this is how much worse it is. Exacerbated to a ridiculous level, because the emotional truism seems to be more important to Russell in this moment than having it make an incredible amount of sense.
Legitimate plot issues, but like I'm perfectly fine forgoing a lot of those because I think it works so well as a character piece and a mood piece.
I have an issue that has nothing to do with the plot, really. It's more of like a tonal inconsistency. Yeah. But Daniel, you go first.
I think Midnight's a much stronger episode in terms of structure and the impact of what it's going for. I like the fact that 2 episodes back to back, we see in a more minute way Companion's importance to the Doctor in terms of him connecting to people, and then we see the Doctor's importance to his companions. I like that parallel. It's really cool. I'm assuming that's why they're put together, because it's a rather weird one to have a bleak, morbid, depressing episode next to a incredibly bleak, morbid, depressing episode.
But hey, it was also an easy way to film 2 episodes simultaneously.
Yeah, exactly.
For me, like, the main issue with this episode, I don't think this is a controversial statement. Russell T Davies is very camp, and he puts a lot of camp into the show. And in small doses, in individual episodes, I can handle it. In this episode, they line them all up, and there are these really intense emotional experiences, and then it's like people are dissolving into fat in the United States, and a lot of the news coverage of it kind of like veers into black comedy for me. So much crap is happening.
I just thought it was kind of silly. Russell T Davies thought he could get away with like people magically forgetting each and every time that all this stuff happened, like aliens came. I'm just talking about at the time of the writing, it just seems very silly that he thought he could get away with that.
In the context of this episode, Lucy, the Doctor dies before the TARDIS can blow up, so no one gets the opportunity to have their memories erased.
Anyway.
I'm not trying to delegitimize your point, Brian. I get what you meant, that it's more cheesy than usual, but here is my hot take. Doctor Who has always been cheesy and always will be incredibly cheesy as long as the show is on.
I get that, but like this is, instead of just like a block of brie, it's just like a whole fondue bucket. It beats you over the head with it when you line it all up. And I'm just like if you lived this existence, it would be depressing and hilarious at the same time. Because like a replica of the Titanic would just like kill your entire family, and then you would dissolve into fat and die and get beamed up into space. What are the rules of this universe? Yeah, and then you get sent to an internment camp.
I think that's actually just an extension of the problem we already mentioned, which is I don't think that's Russell T Davies having like campy sensibilities. I think that's just built into the premise of we're going to revisit previous events.
Every time one of these events is presented real time in the show, it's the end of at least the world, but sometimes half the universe. And so to make it London, just London, for like most of these problems and then squishing them all together in one episode makes like, that's ridiculous. Like, why would you even do that?
Hey, at one point they go to Leeds.
It's a suspension of disbelief thing for me, definitely, because like when you have these individual ones, you're like, yeah, I can handle this, and then they stack them all together, and you're just like, okay, I can't handle this anymore. Or that was my experience, at least.
In a narrative sense, it's not working.
And they pair them with these really intense emotional scenes where like Donna's talking to like her mom, and they're both like super depressed, and Wilf is like trying to maintain this facade that he's still good to go, he's got the war spirit, and then like something else ridiculous happens and they're all depressed again, and I'm like, I want to laugh, but then I want to cry, but then I want to laugh again.
It gets so silly, but it's also very dark at the same time, and sometimes the tones don't always go together. Like it's always cheesy, don't get me wrong, even today it has cheesy moments, but
it bounces back and forth too much for me, like too extreme.
I think it's the fact that we have these extremely silly episode premises, and the entire episode is so serious. It's so dark. Yeah. It's so depressing in an episode which serious, incredibly life-altering plot points involve spaceships shaped like the Titanic crashes into London, and fat becomes sentient and takes over the United States.
You've got to think about how, like, just off-screen, because his plan totally succeeded, we've got, like, Max with his head in a little rolling thing and he's like a little glint in his teeth. It's like all according to
never died in a forklift.
The best scene in the entire television show. we lost out. That was the biggest loss of this episode.
I haven't watched Voyage of the Damned in a while, but I think back to that scene, I'm just like, was that real?
Lucy made a video about it.
Did Kylie Minogue really kill a villain in a Doctor Who episode using a Mystery Science theater joke?
Yes.
And herself. I need to make one more comment about the China planet because I'm still not okay with it, even though we've talked about it before.
I'm not either.
It's called Shan Shen, which that's like the most stereotypical name they could have picked for it. And second, it didn't seem like a China planet to me, or like a Chinese culture planet. It seemed like a commodified culture planet. The idea of China that they sell in Chinese food restaurants, that was what this planet was, not actual China.
It's galactic cultural appropriation.
Yes, it is. And like they just had like fortune telling stuff, and it wasn't like, it was clearly like the ones you would see in like Chinatown in like New York.
It's the evil Asian mystic stereotype, but in space.
It's a tourist trap planet. I now believe that this was set up by like a group of people to draw in stupid intergalactic tourists.
That lady that talks to Donna, she doesn't even have an accent. At the end of the day, she just goes back.
That whole scene is also really hilariously shot because she's just like, turn left, dun dun, turn left, dun dun, and it just like keeps like zooming in, and I'm just like, okay, like calm down. Do the framing device without being this serious about it.
I need to point out, I really like this episode. We seem to be crapping on it a lot. I do really enjoy this, even with its silly moments, even with the tonal weirdness of it, based on its own premise. I love Catherine Tate in it. I mean, in general, I love her, but I think this is probably one of her best. One of my favorite jokes is when she's getting fired and she starts shouting at somebody else that they get fired, then apologizes, then asks again, what does he do in this office?
Yeah.
I mean, the timing of that is brilliant.
Sorry, actually, what do you do all day?
Yeah.
I love when Rose is telling her about the bug and she's having an absolute meltdown. It's so uncomfortable and it feels so real.
I love how we handle that thing because, like we mentioned with Midnight, that sort of Lovecraftian existential horror of like not knowing what you're looking at. And I love that that's what the bug is for everyone in this episode. Anyone who catches a glimpse of it or realizes that there's something on Donna's back, like they don't just react like it's a normal thing. They're freaking out about it. Like the guy who spots it points a gun at her, and it's like no one can identify what it is that they're seeing. They just know that there is a thing there and it should not exist. And it's like driving them to have an existential meltdown.
The
love
woman
the
in
fact
the
that
bar also said that too. She's like, it's like there's something I can't see on your back. And I was like, what the hell would that even look like?
I like the fact that outside of Rose, the people who can see it are completely random. And that completely makes sense to me because the randomness of who would actually end up seeing it, who can break beyond that barrier and see it, that completely makes sense to me. It's better that they don't try to over explain that. It's just, oh, Donna has some cosmic importance and she broke this timeline.
I feel awkward because I keep feeling like I disappear, then I come back to make a negative point. I'm eventually going to say some positive stuff if my internet connection doesn't stop failing. Okay, with the bug thing, okay, for one thing, everyone seems to be pay a lot of attention to this thing, even though massive disasters are happening. Like for example, London has just been destroyed by a Titanic replica falling from space. But this maid is like, my God, I think I can see something on that woman's back there.
The scene where she's like standing outside. And
The invasion of the body snatcher scene. She's like, ugh.
I honestly
down
thought that was the worst scene all of series 4. I really didn't like that at all. It's the same thing when there's a giant spider web literally flying over London, and the woman as well is obsessed with the thing on Donna's back. It's another case of good idea, but in execution, it just makes all these random people look like absolute morons because they're focused on something they think they can hear or see, but isn't actually there on Donna's back, rather than, I don't know, all of London being destroyed. But again, it's one of those things in execution, it was just like really irritating to watch.
I feel like that's just building on what I'm talking about. And this is a thing where it's difficult to portray just because we're watching a TV show and it's only possible for a TV show to show us things that are comprehensible to humans. I like the effect of that. All of this ludicrously important stuff is going on and people are just stuck looking at this thing that should not exist, and it's breaking their brains that they can even comprehend its presence. Like, this is a thing to what Brian briefly brought up. On previous watches of this episode, I looked at scenes like that as like a weird thing, like these characters are morons, and like, oh, that's Russell T Davies being really campy and getting a lot of over-the-top performances from these extras. I don't think that's what it is. I think it's just in story. They look at it and they don't just see like a big bug on her back. Like, that's physically what's there, but like the effect that it has on their minds is like looking at something from Lovecraft. Who cares if a country is exploding? This should not exist. This is not right.
It happens every time though. Like in the event of like a giant spider web and or star, I don't know, in the sky, I feel like the more pressing concern is like not quite what's on this woman's back. I would absolutely just cut and run. Like there's already nonsense happening. I'm leaving. I don't actually care what's on your back. Like we don't have time for this.
There was a adaptation of Color Out of Space, which is a rather famous love.
Oh, is this the Nick Cage one?
Yeah, Nick Cage one. The whole point of Color Out of Space is that it's a color that doesn't actually exist. It's by Richard Stanley, who's like one of my favorite directors, and he hasn't actually done a lot, but it's a great movie. The colors from Colors Out of Space is incomprehensible. It's a color no one has actually seen. It's from space. And you can't actually depict that on film because you can't depict an incomprehensible color.
Yeah, no, funny story about that. Magenta is actually not a color that can be perceived by human eyes. I think the way that they said it, we're perceiving two separate colors together, and it does something weird specifically to the human brain. So they chose magenta specifically for that reason.
No, that makes sense.
A video essay on this. That's why I know. I'm not that smart.
No, that makes sense. I mean, we are talking about a man, he wanted people to themselves. But going back to the point, the idea of people freaking out is that it kind of breaks reality completely, because this reality only exists because of Donna's own importance. She was just supposed to disappear and become completely irrelevant and killing the Doctor. But because of her cosmic significance, people seeing this bug on his back, it breaks the fact that they are not in a real world. They're in an alternate timeline that was created, and that's why they focus on her rather than the disasters going on. I don't think that's communicated very well, but I believe that was the intention that I was going through with it. I agree with Nick that that's difficult to depict on screen.
There was one case where that wasn't true, which was when she was with Wilf, and that was kind of like the Crisis on Infinite Earths moment where all the stars start going out, because that's directly relevant to like other worlds. And I thought, like Nick, you were saying earlier about the Lovecraft stuff being in this episode too. I think that was the Lovecraft moment. I really wish that they hadn't followed it up with Davros, because it didn't really work for me. When I see that kind of stuff, it's always scarier if I don't know what's causing it. And then just having the answer in the next like episode or two, I'm just like, oh, it's comprehensible now. It's no longer scary. But that scene where he's like, yeah, Ryan's belt's like not there, and Donna's like, no, you're crazy, and she looks up, and then they all start going blink, 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 and then just is that moment of like terror where they're both looking at it, and then she just turns around and goes like, I'm ready, and like Rose is just there, like she knew somehow that Rose was going to be right behind her when that happened, and then they're just like, okay, yeah, let's go.
I want to pivot to Rose in a second, but just like to briefly sort of cap off like Daniel's point, and like Brianna said just now, like she's willing to accept that in the context that we get that at the end of the episode. I don't know if the episode is actually doing it intentionally, because if it is, you're right, Daniel, it's not communicated at all, which is the idea that if this entire universe is literally stemming from Donna, like specifically this universe comes from her, maybe that excuses the fact that certain people pay attention to her over anything else. So like something happens, who cares? Donna's here. I don't think the episode means to do that, but that's an interesting way to look at it. I want to talk about Rose. We've been talking about how like we've had a lot of like negative things to say about this episode, and I feel like I've done a lot of like defense for it. I adore this episode. I think I probably like it the most out of all. I like
it a lot.
The indicator of how much this episode works for me is that I really enjoy Rose in this episode. We had a whole like 3 hours of discussion after we finished this episode last night about like our very different opinions about Rose, how she's a completely different person in this episode to who she is in series 1 and 2. I think she's really fun here. I really, really enjoy her.
I think she works well as being that episode's the Doctor.
Yeah, as little sense as that made to me specifically.
Billie Piper, I think she's a pretty terrific actress. I actually really like her in Day of the Doctor.
Yes, where again she's playing a completely different person.
Completely different character, yeah. Yeah, no, she's fun in this. I like the rapport she builds with Donna.
I love the moment where Donna sees the inside of the TARDIS. It's great because like things could not possibly be worse at that moment, but the two of them are still able to share a smile and a laugh over something.
Yeah. I like that she's really honest with Donna as well. She doesn't try to her in any way. I like the amount of empathy in her face. Donna's trying to rationalize that she doesn't have to die, and you know, Rose is like holding in that she knows differently, and it's such a really heartbreaking moment where she really wants to try to find comfort to this poor woman, but she can't.
Why not just lie to her when you're about to send her on this incredibly important mission that definitely like demoralized her right before she was supposed to go and like fix the universe? Maybe we just don't need to like do that at this exact moment.
Everything's okay. Yeah. Go, Donna, go.
I mean, she's going to find out 30 seconds later that she's going to die anyway, so why lie to her?
Time to stew, I think, is the worst part, because she has to run like across the city, because for some reason they were able to like perfectly throw Rose exactly where she needed to be, but with Donna it's just like, yeah, we'll put you like 10 streets down.
That's part of again what Daniel was talking about earlier, which is just Catherine Tate's performance. She carries this whole episode in like the tone of it.
Oh yeah,
she, like, naturally do the like bouncing back and forth from really dark to like briefly funny. It's like, I'm half a mile away. I'm half a mile away.
It reminded me of Sarah Jane's departure in the classic show, and the Doctor drops her off halfway across the country.
Yeah.
All right, get out.
Because he's an idiot.
I think they did that on purpose, though, so she couldn't make it there to just like tap on the window and tell herself she had to kill herself to make it like work. I think they did it on purpose. Like they knew they were sending her on like a suicide mission.
As silly as it is that it takes the silly Russell T Davies episode so seriously, I love the moments where like her mom is just paralyzed with depression. Considering Donna's mom is a terrible, terrible person, it legitimately makes me feel sorry for her.
That's a moment that we and like Lucy and Edward and I have
so human.
We gone back to was like, oh, that's just another example of her being terrible. Where Donna's like, well, I guess I've always been a bit of a disappointment, and her mom is just like, yeah.
Her mom is a piece of I'm sorry. Like, she's the worst character in this episode.
Right, but like in that scene, she's not doing that to make her feel worse. In that scene, she's just catatonic. I get the feeling in that scene that she's barely paying attention to what Donna's saying.
It bothers me that her first instinct is to like attack her daughter. Like, you peel back all the other stuff, and she's a catatonic, and she's just like, yeah, Donna, like, I hate you. You're the worst daughter ever. And
I'm not reading
I will say, like,
into it. I'm just reading, I acknowledge a thing that was stated somewhere around me because I'm barely comprehending what's going on at this point.
I'm not trying to defend her as a person. I just think that moment is very human because if they did something stupid like them coming together or whatever over this, it would feel very disingenuous. The fact that she can't even bring herself to say anything, I felt that was effective, and I think the actor plays that very well. And don't get me wrong, I despise Donna's mother. She's a terrible, terrible character. Glad they didn't do something schmaltzy because this episode feels, it gets the emotion very real and it's really harsh, but I think it needs to be in order to pay off what happens at the end.
One of the cool things about the episode as well is that, like, because Donna is more, I guess, like you would call it, like, working class than the other companions, like Rose is, but it's barely ever mentioned after like the first season. The ground floor feel of it, though, like in this episode specifically, with like Donna and her family and like the struggles they have to go through, like economically. She's like looking for work the whole time, and she's got these like crappy dead end jobs, which is like the catalyst for the whole episode too, because she's got to do the whole turning thing. I think they delved into it like specifically in this episode more than they ever had prior to that. Like they did a little bit with Rose and her mom, but like Martha was like a doctor. She wasn't really in the same economic state as the other companions.
So that's part of like the discussion that we, like Brianna and I had about it, which is like Rose is a child for her tenure as a companion. She really has no impetus or need to get a job or have that kind of like roots in the community, like social relationship with anything. Martha has a pretty high paying job that you usually consider like an upper class thing. And like from the little that we get of her home life, it seems like she's living pretty nice for someone who I think is living on her own. Donna's really the only character at this stage that you could explore that angle with, like that socioeconomic side of things. And like on the subject of her mom, like her mom kind of has to be as awful as she is because she is the source of all of Donna's issues, really.
Yeah.
You get the sense that that also comes from like, she thinks as little of herself as she thinks of Donna. And like she's projecting a lot of self-hatred onto her daughter. And like that comes through in a conversation where, again, Wilf is like with the family and they're all singing and stuff. And it's just Donna and her mom laying down on the floor. And Donna's like trying to make suggestions of like what they could do. And her mom is just like, why do you even keep trying to do anything? We are no one. No one cares.
What if it never gets better?
We can't do anything because we are nobodies. And like you get the sense that all of Donna's self-confidence comes from this woman. Think of herself as anything, who doesn't think of Donna as anything, who sees no point in trying to be significant. She's freaking out on Rose. You told me I was special. You told me I meant something. That's something that's been stewing under this character since we've met her. This constant thing of like, I can't do anything. I'm not important. Why do you think I'm important? Why do you think I'm significant? Like it really just unloads in this episode.
Like I said, she legitimately is just having a breakdown over the idea that she feels Rose has to be lying to her because why is she important? How has she had any impact on this world? It's so painful to watch. It really stems from that core relationship with her terrible, terrible mother.
And she's like suddenly shouting during that scene as well, just because of all the pent up emotion about it. Just like bam, like right in your face.
It's so hard to watch because I really love Donna, but it's so effective. Like I said, her mother clearly has a lot of self-loathing issues. She, even before the Catatonia moment, she's clearly very depressed. And yet then you have Wilf, who's a god, her father, who's a sweetheart.
Donna was just like her mom, if not for Wilf's influence, most likely.
Yeah.
And like Brianna just made a really good point, because this is something that I was thinking about. Part of that self-confidence thing would just be like being a human traveling around with the Doctor and like as special as he is. The thing that came to mind as I was talking about it is the Centauran episode. And that scene that really stuck out to me rewatching those, where she's inside the TARDIS, there's a single Centauran guarding this door that she needs to get to. And she's on the phone with the Doctor's like, what do I do? It's okay. You can just like take something and knock it out. And like, I trust you to do this. He has to like spend a couple of minutes psyching her up because she's just like, I don't think I can do it. I can't do it. I feel like any other companion would have been able to do that relatively quickly. Donna's like paralyzed with this lack of confidence and lack of faith in herself dealing with a single Centauran, which us as viewers, like we don't think of Centaurans as like a big deal. Like you can take one out, no problem. But in the moment, Donna's like, I can't do it.
I just think it was realistic. If a person found themselves on like an alien spaceship, they would be paralyzed with fear.
Donna has like this crippling self-doubt that no one else seems to have. It's the self-doubt of someone who's like a constant emotional laborer.
I like the social class aspect you brought up, and I think it's something that Russell T Davies really kind of pinned on a lot that really hasn't been picked up as much since. I mean, we do get into family relationships and history and stuff with other companions.
Like, look at Amy's jobs for comparison.
Yeah, you don't really get that sense. I like the fact that she's going to this high-end job in the city because she wants to find someone there, and of course her mother has to put that on as well. Like, probably one of my most hated lines from her. It gets across kind of the best and worst in the character, and the fact that like her internal insecurity and self-doubt nearly ruins everything when they try to send her back.
I think it's a testament to how like effectively the episode puts you in Donna's headspace. When the doctor comes through the curtain at the end, he's like, "Oh hey, what's up?" I had like an audible sigh of relief. Oh god, thank goodness he's back.
There's a total sense of comfort, and when he's explaining kind of the cosmic stuff and stuff like that, it feels very relieving.
He's like, "Dad's back."
Yeah.
Yeah. The bad wolf. How does that even work?
I like the idea that the cosmic fear and destruction comes around from the fact that Rose is back.
Like ending this episode with the bad wolf thing, we got on the whole, like a 2-hour tangent just about the bad wolf arc in series 1. It never once occurred to me to bring up like how it makes no sense that those words pop up in this episode. It's
How
like
did it get on the TARDIS?
that's the kind of thing that you would do in like a more artsy sort of episode where it's like Bad Wolf didn't literally just show up everywhere. We are literally figuratively seeing things from the Doctor's perspective, and he hears the words Bad Wolf, and suddenly those words are everywhere for him. I don't think the episode is communicating that very well, if that's what it is. Right now, it just reads like he heard the words Bad Wolf. Suddenly, there's Bad Wolf everywhere, and it's not going to mean anything in like next episode.
I always like the cloister bell. I like the fact that it signals that things are going really to the end. I've always enjoyed the cloister bell thing because it's a very doomsday thing, the heavy bongs. It's a really cool sound effect. This is really unrelated to this episode, but I remember my friend saying that the Doctor kind of retroactively makes the whole thing of Rose absorbing the TARDIS a little bit more bearable. You can basically retroactively headcanon that to say that she's taking in the moment out of the TARDIS, and that's what's causing all the destruction.
I think that makes any more sense than what we have, but that's a discussion for another time.
Yeah, maybe when we're discussing the 50th anniversary, which will probably be 3 hours long. I do really like this episode. It's probably one of my favorite episodes from the RTD era. I think it has a lot of silly stuff, and I think that's bred into the premise of taking really silly Russell T Davies concepts and turning them on their head to be really serious and dark. And like I said, I think all the kind of weird logic stuff and the rather iffy kind of looks into bigotry and stuff like that, it's to serve a more emotionally layered story, which is about this woman facing the weight of her own insecurities and feelings of insignificance in the cosmic scale and realizing her own importance, taking that to the extreme that she risks her own life to save everything from this complete unparalleled disaster, which it shows the strength of her character. I think the acting is really good. Again, as much as I complained about Donna's mom, I like that dynamic we get throughout the episode. That family is what anchors this, and it takes us through it, and I like the interplay between them. I think I said before, I really like how Russell T Davies writes his supporting characters, not just the Doctor and his companions, but other characters he recurs and background characters and stuff like that. I like how cynical it is. Like, one of my favorite moments in it is the social worker who's just belligerent and uncaring, probably a bit over the top, but I've had that experience with people in those kind of public service positions who just do not want to be there. So that felt relatable, even a bit over the top. But I can handle how overblown this episode can be and how silly a lot of it is in context, because it felt emotionally true. And I think that's where it gets strained. Even with my flaws, I think it really works. I really enjoy it. And I'm looking forward to seeing Donna's importance brought up again in the finale so I can cry.
I agree with a lot of that too. I think Donna and Wilf are like the two characters that really carry the episode. I think overall, if they had carried Donna's kind of lesson in this episode into Journey's End, I would have enjoyed it more, because it felt like there was a little dalliance here in her, making her self-confident, and then they were just like, we're going to forget that and have her do it again. again in the next 2 episodes. But I think the main thing that everyone should remember from this episode is that David Tennant says the last line, "It's the end of the universe," in his natural Scottish accent. So distracting that I can't think of anything else. But I do love this episode. It's the end of the universe.
My thoughts about this episode, I think it's okay. I just wish I liked it more. But I will say, I do relate to the whole feeling of everything just seems like it just keeps getting worse and worse.
It's real life. Woo.
I can't even complain about it takes itself so seriously and then all these silly things happen. We're in the middle of a situation in real life where everything just gets worse and worse, and yet it's mainly getting worse because of things that are profoundly silly and stupid.
Mostly people.
I will say that I like this episode because it shows us that Donna's character, she's not a Clara. She's not made by the Doctor. She's not formed by the Doctor. She's informed by the Doctor. And even without him, she remains the same. She retains her principles and her values. And like, she is not a changed, malleable character. She has a life to her. And I like that a lot.
I think it's pretty dang rad. I love it a lot. It's probably not something that I'll revisit often. I say that a lot because I don't revisit episodes of this show often in general. It being like my favorite show, I don't feel compelled to revisit episodes a lot. But this one is one that I'm probably just going to let sit really well in my memory because I don't know if I want to watch people be sad for that long in quick succession. I'm going to need a break.
Because of my internet connection, I've only just occasionally popped into it, shoot down positive comments. But,
How dare you?
I do actually think this episode is okay. I just think it's sort of a mix for me. Kind of like Aliens of London is, of like the good parts of RTD and the worst parts. I think like bad parts are, I think, the execution of the alternate universe. I think it's a bit of a mess in terms of like why certain things happen. Some of the sillier things that happen here, like anything to do with the time beetle.
The worst prop ever.
I just in general, Rose's involvement, which is that pretty much set up the finale and just doesn't work in any way at all. The parts that I do like are how we see how it affects the humans in this reality. As London is destroyed, we see them reduced to refugees living in a house with multiple different people, and especially how it shows England descending into this dystopian country, which puts immigrants in concentration camps, is pretty horrifying and dark material for Doctor Who. I think the descent of Donna's mum into this just completely brain dead, depressed character is very interesting and compelling to watch, and it definitely is an interesting idea. It's definitely not a boring episode. I just think some parts of it don't work as well as the parts that do really work. It's a mixed bag of an episode for me, but I'm overall going to say thumbs up to it, like a lot of Series 4. But it's not one of my favorites of this series, though. Not as great as people say it is. It's fine. But there's a lot of stuff that irks me about it, particularly the ending as well, with Bad Wolf splatting everywhere, which didn't really work for me. It was just a convenient way of setting up the finale, I thought. Overall, mixed bag, but overall more good in it than bad.
Just paraphrase, life without the Doctor would be really, really terrible.